Been a week since Nolan Wells' body was found on Horn Island. As the country sits and waits for the investigations to conclude, many questions are still left to be answered.
Warren Hudson has not been charged with anything. No investigator has publicly named him as a suspect. He became a focus of attention on the 21st of August, when his own attorneys filed a 19-page document with his name on the front, per WLOX and CNN. That document is a defamation demand. In it, his lawyers call him one of three completely innocent young men. That is how a witness becomes a headline, by refusing to stay anonymous. What does the account actually say? It starts with a number, 30. 30 people on a boat to Horn Island. That is the picture their attorneys drew in the 19-page document, served on the Reverend Al Sharpton, per WLOX, CNN, and Oxygen. Not a handful of friends. A 30-person boating party, per the account their lawyers set out to CNN. 3 of those 30 are the ones who chose to come forward under their own names, Warren Hudson, Jax Pitalo, and Morgan Seymour. Nobody made them do that, and nobody had accused them of anything that required it. Then the part of the account that matters most, and it is worth quoting carefully because it is their account and not a finding. The letter says Hudson, Pitalo, and Seymour left with others, and that Nolan Wells stayed behind. It also says the 3 later contacted his family and the authorities and helped search for him. And what did the 3 do after that, per the letter? They contacted Nolan's family. They contacted authorities. They helped search for him. That is not a story told to a reporter. It's a written claim, with names attached, in a 19-page document. And it's a claim investigators can test against GPS data, against witness interviews, against the timeline. So the account exists twice. Once in the public letter, once in private interviews no one will ever play for you. One version is written for the public. The other was told to investigators, behind closed doors. That letter, the one filed on the 21st of August, is a pre-litigation defamation demand. That's a legal step that says, correct the record, or we will see you in court. 19 pages of corrections demanded, addressed to a national figure. It is a demand, not a lawsuit. A legal first move, with the threat of court waiting behind it. J. Tyler Cox told CNN, the biggest tragedy of this entire thing is that Nolan unfortunately lost his life, and nobody knows definitively what happened. Nobody knows definitively. That sentence is careful, on purpose. It's not a confession, it's not an accusation, it's the lawyer's way of saying the account is incomplete, and the case is still moving. So why file a defamation demand at all, now, in the middle of an open investigation? Because, their attorneys say, the case had already turned into something else. Edward Andrew Paltzik, the defamation lawyer on the team, told CNN that edited audio of an emergency tow call has turned a tragic case into a circus. A red herring, he called it. The audio exists. The editing is the attorney's claim. The circus, they say, is what happened in between. Circus. That word tells you what the summer became for these 3 young men. Conspiracies around Nolan's death, per their attorneys, have led to threats against the people who were with him that day. And 3 people have been charged federally over threats aimed at a judge, witnesses, and local officials, per CNN, PBS NewsHour, and Mississippi Public Broadcasting. So here is account 1, in full. 30 people on a boat. A 64-minute window where Nolan Wells was last seen alive. A boat leaving at 4:31. 3 young men on that boat, 1 not. A search, no one charged, and a letter insisting on the innocence of the 3 names on its cover. Account 1, on the record. But there is a second version of that afternoon moving through the internet, and it has already ended in federal charges. Account 2 does not live in a letter. It lives in comment sections, in reposts, in group chats that have never been named. And it has already produced federal charges. The other lawyer on that team put it differently, and more plainly. J. Tyler Cox, the Mississippi attorney, told CNN, the biggest tragedy of this entire thing is that Nolan unfortunately lost his life, and nobody knows definitively what happened. He also said all 3 of his clients have been questioned by authorities. That is what being a witness in an active investigation looks like. You answer questions, and the office asking them does not publish what you said. None of that is in any official record. None of it has been stated by the sheriff. None of it has been stated by the FBI. It is a story that moves because it feels like a story, and it has a body count of its own. So account 2 has consequences that account 1 does not. Account 1 is a letter, account 2 is a federal docket. And here is the part that should stop you. The people at the center of account 2, the 3 young men named in the letter, have not been named by any investigator, not by the sheriff, not by the FBI, not by any prosecutor. The only document that names them is the one their own lawyers filed. The letter that calls them, in writing, completely innocent young men. That is the strange shape of this case. The only public document that names Warren Hudson, Jax Pitalo, and Morgan Seymour is the one demanding that people stop treating them as guilty. The investigators have not named them, the charges have not named them, the letter names them, to defend them. J. Tyler Cox, their attorney, told CNN, "The biggest tragedy of this entire thing is that Nolan unfortunately lost his life, and nobody knows definitively what happened." Nobody knows definitively. That is the sentence that holds both accounts together. Account 1 says, "Here is what happened, on the record." Account 2 says, "Here is what really happened, trust us." And the official record says, "Nobody knows definitively." A grand jury. That is the next room, and no one has told you what is inside it. Here is the narration for the beat, continuing directly from the script. So where does that leave us? Because the 2 accounts are not just different stories about the same afternoon. They are 2 different versions of what time means. Account 1 lives on a documented timeline. It starts with the number 30, the size of the group that day, and it ends with a number you can check. CBS News reports the boat leaving at 4:31. Account 2 lives in a gap, and that gap is where the whole case turns. Here is the collision. The United Cajun Navy's timeline puts Nolan's last verified sighting in a window that runs 3:23 to 4:27. CBS reports the boat leaving at 4:31. Do the arithmetic honestly. The window closes at 4:27, and the boat leaves at 4:31. So the unaccounted stretch runs anywhere from 4 minutes to 68, depending where inside the window the sighting falls. No official record narrows it. That is the first point where the 2 accounts collide. One story says the timeline is complete. The other story says that gap is where everything that matters lives. The second collision is a number, 3. 3 young men named in a letter their own lawyers filed. 3 young men who have not been named by any investigator. Account 2 demands to know why a 64-minute window has no official explanation, but the only official document that puts those 3 names on paper is the one demanding that the public stop reading their silence as guilt. Here is where the arithmetic gets tight. Account 1 says the 4-minute gap between the boat leaving and the last verified sighting is small enough to ignore. Account 2 says that gap is the only thing that matters. 2 readings of the same minutes. The record does not say which is correct. The record only gives us both. And there is a third point of collision, and it is the most careful one. The letter says the timeline does not hold. It says the 64-minute window is where the story breaks. But the letter also states the 3 named men are, in its own words, completely innocent. Those 2 sentences sit inside the same document. The timeline does not hold, and the 3 men are completely innocent. Both are being argued at once, by the same lawyers, in the same filing. None of that makes account 1 true. None of it makes account 2 false. What it does is draw the 2 most careful lines in this case, and then shows that they cross in the same place. Now the one point every timeline runs through. A single number that both sides keep having to explain. The same minute that opens the window, and the one that, per the sheriff's office, may close it. That is the number the case has been breaking on since July 4th. 90. That is a number that will not leave the story alone. It is the number of days between the night Nolan Wells went missing and the day the letter arrived at the courthouse. The first account, the one that called for a federal investigation, hit 90 days from the disappearance, demanding the case move. The second account, the letter from the 3 young men's own lawyers, arrived on that same count. 90 days. Not a coincidence you can prove. But it is a number that both sides have now written into the record, whether they meant to or not verbatim. One side counts to 90 and says, "Act now." The other side counts to 90 and says, "Stop." The same number. Two demands. One date on the calendar. That is the exact point where the timelines collide. Not in a fact that either side has proven, but in a number that means something different to each of them. It is also the point where the public stops being able to tell the two accounts apart, because both are using the same clock. And that collision has a cost. It gets carried by people who are not lawyers and not investigators. Social media picked its side within days. The threats followed. 3 people are now federally charged over those threats. The FBI is still investigating. That is not a plot point. That the record of this case in court. So where do these accounts actually meet? At 2 documents. 2 autopsies, one sealed and one returning undetermined, and both sides waiting on the same grand jury. The family's independent autopsy, per ABC7 and News Nation, returned a finding, undetermined. The official state autopsy, per WLOX, was completed by July 31st. Its results never made publishers, and now referred to a grand jury. One refused to conclude. The other has not concluded. 2 documents, 2 different kinds of silence, and both sides are reading them as if they were confessions. The record says both readings are wrong. The record says both readings are possible. The 2 timelines cannot be harmonized by arithmetic alone repetition. 5 minutes here, 64 there, 4 at the dock. The math does not resolve the story. The math only shows you where the story breaks. But there is one number that everyone agrees on, the $90. And that is the point where account 1 and account 2 stop being 2 theories and become 2 accusations. The first one accuses the state. The second one accuses the public. One of them, the record says, has already produced a court case against a private citizen, not a theory but a federal docket. The other has produced nothing but a letter, a demand, and a silence that has now lasted for weeks. So here we stand at 3 exact points of collision, and each one ends in a different court document. The 431 gap ends in a letter, the 64-minute window ends in an autopsy, and the 3 names that the investigators have never put on paper end in a demand that the public stop what it is doing, where contact might lead, if the 2 timelines could be stretched to the same length. If the 2 autopsies and both sets of lawyers have ever actually met in the same room, as the 14th week. The letter is dated August 21st. It is 19 pages long. That is not 19 pages of evidence. It is 19 pages of legal positioning. Warren Hudson, Jax Pitalo, and Morgan Seymour did not sign it. Their lawyers did. A Mississippi attorney named J. Tyler Cox and a defamation specialist out of New York named Edward Andrew Paltzik. 2 lawyers, 1 document, 3 names, and 1 word that appears in the letter and never leaves. Innocent. Completely innocent. That is the language the letter uses. It is not a suggestion. It is not a hope. It is a written assertion, filed on behalf of 3 young men who have met with investigators and who have not been charged with anything. Now, why do you file a pre-litigation letter? You file it when you believe someone with a microphone is damaging your client. The recipient here is not a detective and not a prosecutor. It is the Reverend Al Sharpton. The letter demands a retraction. The word innocent is doing real work in there. A criminal defense lawyer does not usually put that word in writing at this stage. You say, our client denies the allegations. You say, he maintains his innocence. You do not often say, completely innocent, in a document designed to stop defamation. Because, of course, a defamation lawyer only needs one thing to be true, that what was said about his client is false. Innocent is an assertion. It is not a finding. So what does the letter actually do? It freezes a story. It puts the 3 names on paper, under the signature of counsel, declaring innocence before any investigator has declared anything else. It is a counter-narrative, legally framed. Here is what the letter does not do. It does not produce new evidence. It does not reopen the timeline. It does not move that clock forward so of the night back in motion. A document can say many things, but it cannot change what a phone records. And that is the tension. The law sent a letter, the investigation has not, And while the lawyers were counting pages, the sheriff was counting witnesses. More than 30 of them have given statements, according to local reporting. 30 statements, one file, no charges. So you have two records running in parallel. One record is public. It is letters and statements and claims and denials, printed in ink, meant to be read. The other record is quiet. It exists in a coroner's office and a sheriff's department, and almost none of it reaches you. The public record is moving fast. The investigative record is moving at its own speed, and that speed is not measured in news cycles. None of this tells us what happened on the water that night. A defamation letter cannot do that. It cannot recreate a moment. It cannot reconstruct the dark on the river. It can only do one thing: protect the names of the men whose lawyers say they are innocent. But here is the uncomfortable part. When 3 young men retain counsel within weeks of a death, and when that counsel files a 19-page letter before the investigation is complete, the public does not always hear the word innocent. The public hears the word lawyer, and the lawyers know that. They filed anyway. Which tells you something about the pressure those 3 names have been under. A family is grieving. A mother buried her child. Suspicion moves faster than evidence. The record, right now as I speak to you, contains exactly one written legal position. 3 young men, represented, calling themselves completely innocent, and demanding a public figure take it back. That is not guilt. That is not innocence either. It is a legal act. It is 3 men using civil law to hold their own story in place while the criminal process does its work in silence. And the silence is significant. The sheriff has spoken with more than 60 people in this case. 60+ statements. 60+ chances for some detail to crack open. Nothing has cracked, no arrests, no announced suspect, no one named by law enforcement. The letter fills that silence. It is what you do when the authorities are not going to give you a piece of paper to show people. So you write your own piece of paper. You put your name on it, ting enemy. But here is the catch, and it is a catch that matters. A demand letter is not an alibi. It is not corroboration. It is a legal position. And legal positions are held by lawyers, not by evidence. The letter says these young men are innocent. It does not say what happened on that boat. It does not say who did what when. It says, do not call our clients guilty, or we will sue. And that is a very different document than the one the state will eventually produce or not produce. Because while the lawyers have been writing, the sheriff has been quiet. So here is what is actually on the table. 46 days after the death. 3 named young men, 1 19-page letter, and an investigation that has, so far, produced no arrests, no charges, and no public explanation of what the evidence shows. The letter says innocent. The silence says nothing at all. Which brings us to the one document in this entire case that nobody can spin, translate, or explain away. The one piece of paper that does not have a lawyer's name at the bottom, and it arrived at the courthouse on a Friday afternoon. Here is the beat, written to your specifications. The 19-page letter was signed by 2 lawyers, Mississippi Attorney J. Tyler Cox, defamation lawyer Edward Andrew Paltzik, and they represent 3 young men by name, Warren Hudson, Jax Pitalo, and Morgan Seymour. That is the document that changed the public shape of this case, not because the state filed it, but because the state didn't. The lawyers did. The letter went to Reverend Al Sharpton. It is a pre-litigation demand. That means no lawsuit has been filed yet. It is the legal equivalent of clearing your throat. 19 pages of throat clearing, telling a national figure that these 3 young men are completely innocent. Skip. Now here is what the letter does not do. It does not say what happened on Horn Island. It does not say who was where at what time. It does not explain the 64-minute window. It says one thing, and one thing only. These clients are innocent, and you need to stop saying otherwise. But here is the tension that makes this case hard to follow. The lawyers are doing the talking because the investigators are not. The sheriff has not named a suspect. The district attorney has not filed a charge. The state has been silent, and silence creates a vacuum. Into that vacuum stepped a 19-page document with the word innocent written all over it. So what do we actually know? From documents we can hold, we know 3 young men hired counsel. We know that counsel wrote a letter in August. We know the letter uses the word innocent. And we know that a 19-page letter from a defamation lawyer is not an alibi. It is a warning shot. It tells Sharpton, if you keep saying what you're saying, we will sue you. And Sharpton, to this day, has not named anyone. He has not said Warren Hudson. He has not said Jax Pitalo. He has not said Morgan Seymour. The letter is a response to coverage, not to charges. There are no charge tags. There is no indictment. There is no suspect named by law enforcement. There is a 19-page letter, and there is silence. So here is what we have, 4 weeks in. The state has said nothing about the 3 young men. The lawyers have said everything, completely innocent. And in between, one family buried a son. Warren Hudson's name did not appear in public records until his own lawyers put it there. That is the turn. The document that tells you these 3 men are innocent is the same document that made them the center of the story. What remains is the one document that can actually change the facts, the one that comes from the state. It has not arrived. No charges, no exclusions, no findings. Until it does, the lawyer's letter is all we have. And a letter, no matter how many pages, is just words. The evidence doesn't write letters. It waits in a file, in a lab, in a 64-minute gap that nobody has explained. And that is where this case sits. 3 innocent men, by their own lawyers telling, and an investigation that has not said a word.